Morning, world changers. We are back for another values-led conversation with Alan Williams, the creator of the card game ValuesJam, and Karen Darke. Now, Karen has so many achievements, it's impossible to list them all here. So do go on and explore her website at karendarke.com. But what I can tell you briefly about Karen is that she's described as a modern day alchemist, an adventurer, athlete, speaker, and author. And Karen's purpose is about inspiring and impacting and turning challenge into opportunity. Karen started out as a geologist researching gold in the Bolivian Andes, but a life-changing accident that left her paralyzed led her away from being a rock doctor to winning gold in a sport of Paralympic hand cycling in Rio 2016. Karen views life as an adventure and embraces all its experiences as opportunities to learn and grow. So I'm sure you'll agree, Karen will be a very inspiring guest for today's Values Jam. No pressure there, Karen.
No pressure. I've just cycled out to a lighthouse, which was rather a big effort for me because I've been quite ill this summer, so I've not been training, and I have my 3 nephews staying, as you know. So yeah, we shall see how we get on. But
well,
yeah,
I'll hand over to you guys. I'll hand over to Alan, and he can take over. Enjoy your Values Jam session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susie. And well, when I've just heard what you've been up to with your life so far, I was thinking, well, most people regard this as a bit of an exciting adventure, but I'm not sure how it's going to compare to some of the stuff that you've done.
No, it's always an exciting adventure. The learning's everywhere, isn't it? From the smallest to the biggest of things. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see where we go. This is the Values Jam card deck.
Great.
And so what's in here are 60 values cards. Well, 59 to be accurate, because 59 of them have values words on the front, and then the 60th is a joker card. And the reason we've done that is so that if people want to play with a value word that is not on the list of 59, then they use the joker card to do that. And so the best way to experience it is just to dive in, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Let's get stuck in.
All right. Well, why don't you give me a letter of the alphabet from near the back end?
X.
Oh,
that's too difficult.
No, it's not too difficult, but I'm going to choose the closest cards that we've got to X, and we have 3 of them. So would you like number 1, 2, or 3?
Let's go with number 1.
Okay, well, how about this one?
Wealth. Interesting.
Yes. So what does wealth mean? What does it look, feel, and sound like?
Is that a question to me?
That is a question to you. Well, it's a question to you to start with, and then we'll have a discussion, because, you know, this is really just a values prompted discussion between the 2 of us. And it's, you know, if for instance you said, oh, that's going to take some thinking about, why don't you go first, then that's absolutely fine, and we just see where it goes. So what's wealth?
For me, wealth, well, I mean, the obvious answer is that it's to do with money, but when I think about wealth, I think about how I value freedom and time more than money. So it's about freedom and time, I think, for me. And interestingly, I was on the world's alternative, I can't remember if it was by the Times, I think it was the Times Skoda alternative rich list. So that's kind of probably where I sit with it.
And what about what it looks, feels, and sounds like?
Spacious, expansive, colourful, golden. I wouldn't be able to go with this if I didn't have the word golden in there, since I seem to be all about golden. Yeah, looks, feels, sounds like. Yeah, sounds like, that's an interesting one. Don't really know what to say to that. I mean, the sound that comes to mind is like nature and wind.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, this, isn't it? Because like you've said, it's easy to kind of go to money, but the first word that popped into my head was abundance. You know, feeling that you are in a good place with whatever the thing is that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
I'm like you with regard to the other stuff versus money. I had a call with somebody earlier today who has a senior civil service job and was basically saying that they're working all the hours that there are, and that includes weekends and includes being interrupted at important family occasions to answer questions to do with work. And at the end of the game, I kind of just said, you know, I'm just feeling so grateful that I've chosen to live the way that I do rather than do the sort of job that you do. Actually, that was maybe a bit unkind, but it wasn't in context of the conversation. But I think wealth, I was having a conversation actually with a teenager in Sao Paulo last week, and he sent me a photograph, which is of a penthouse block of flats, very luxurious, so luxurious, they've got swimming pools on their balconies, so like wow. High end, right slap next door to a slum. And he was telling me that he has friends who live in the slum. And he was explaining how they have wonderful friendships and they look out for each other. And in many ways, although they haven't got a lot of material stuff, they do enjoy life at one level. And then he was comparing it, you know, he was speculating about the sort of people that live in the penthouse flats. And he was saying, I'm imagining a child the same age as my friends, and maybe they're a single child and they can't play out, and maybe they're on their electronic devices all the time. So, you know, who's in the better place, really? And that kind of plays to what you were talking about, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously need some form of money to survive in the world, but
yeah,
I mean, there's so much research that shows that once you get to a certain level, motivation and happiness doesn't increase. It's all about just having enough that we're not on the breadline. But actually, when I think about times in my life when I have been very low in money, it's also a time when you enjoy other aspects of life very deeply, and connections and friendships and care, and you appreciate what you have more because you're so, you know, when the times that I've been perhaps short of basics like food, I've often been on expeditions, and it's incredible how even 1 teaspoon of something is just incredible nectar, and you just value it so much. So yeah, I mean, there's huge wealth in that, in not having things. You know, it just brings your attention to other things and other things that you appreciate and feel grateful for.
Yeah, it's this relativity thing, isn't it? That when you've got stuff, you, like you say, somehow you take it for granted rather than appreciating the real value of it. And you're in Mallorca, right, at the moment?
I'm at the moment, yeah.
So I went to visit September, and I'm not sure why let's see where this goes, but we decided that we were going to get up at 5:30 in the morning to go and see the sunrise. I can't remember, it's the northeast of the island. There's a place near there where it's good to go and see. And we had found an alternative spot recommended by local people rather than the normal tourist spot. And so we got there probably about 45 minutes before the sun came up. By the way, scary drive in the dark. But when the sun did come up, I just remember thinking, oh, and by the way, a mother goat and her kid came by, and they came really close to us.
It sounds like you might have been where I've been today, Formentor Lighthouse.
I don't know. Oh, maybe, yes, I think that's right.
There's a lot of goats, and it's a scary drive.
Yeah, goodness me.
That's where I've been on my bike today.
Wow. So I just remember standing there thinking, you know, what's this worth in money terms? And you can't really equate. And I just remember feeling really kind of privileged to be there, to be able to not be worrying about anything else, just waiting for the sun to come up, you know, hearing the goats and seeing this goat with her kid, and just thinking that's a special moment. And yet you couldn't actually pay anybody for that, which is a bit weird when you compare it to what people normally think of as being wealth and buying things and stuff like that. And I love what you said about the teaspoon being a bit like nectar because it's so scarce, which maybe leads us on to another question, actually, which is, where have you noticed a lack of wealth? And it could be in that widest sense that we've talked about. Or it could
people often ask me why I do some of the adventures that I do or some of the journeys that I take, and they often involve a degree of what other people might see as deprivation or roughness or non-luxuriousness. But actually that's where I re-find my wealth. If I'm living in kind of Western society and with the values and the things that I get drawn into in Western culture, I'm saying Western culture, but in modern living, wherever that might be, then I often end up feeling quite empty. Like it becomes so much about, there's so many demands on us, there's so many pulls on us, there's so many things to do, so many things to fulfill that it feels like it just and you get into habits that aren't necessarily good, like checking your phone all the time or drinking Starbucks and all these kinds of little habits that we pick up, which there's nothing wrong with, but actually every now and again I re-find something really special. And I actually call this wealth, I think, your inner gold. Since I've been a gold person all my life in various aspects, I have to go away from my routines to re-find it and just find space and nature and connection in friendships and other cultures. So I find there's a lack of wealth for me when I'm stuck in a routine for too long, doing the same old, where I'm not maybe valuing things to the same degree that I'd like to or want, do when I've reset myself and come back to it with different eyes.
Yeah, and so for me, two things come to mind. One is a personal one, which is to that narrower definition of money. So when I was on my industrial release year from university, I got paid by the hotel that I was working in, but it wasn't very much. And so it meant that I couldn't afford, if the guys at work said, are you going to come out for some beers and all that sort of stuff, I couldn't really go because I could only afford to buy one drink and then that would be it. And so I worked split shifts. So from 8 until 2 and then 6 until 11, that kind of shift pattern. And I remember I spent my afternoons either reading, and I had a couple of novel collections, or just walking. It was in Eastbourne, so walking up and down the seafront, and that was it. That's the way that I spent my time. But actually those books, and it was a collection by Herman Hesse in particular that I remember, and also George Orwell. And I really still am very fond of those books, even though they're not really the sort of books that I would say that I enjoy reading now. I remember many of them, and they are an important part of my life. And similarly, the walks up and down the pier, I remember being able to just kind of take pleasure from watching people, observing people, looking at flowers, really, really simple things when you're not in a position to buy a Starbucks and all of that sort of stuff. So that's at one level. And then the other thing that you've reminded me of is when I worked in the corporate world, how many people there were that were just slaves to their career. And it's like, how sad is that? Because they might have been on great salaries. I remember my boss, actually, his salary only represented 20% of his income because his bonus was 4 times his salary, and at a very high level. But actually, he worked so hard and rarely saw his family. And it's like, well, how can it be worth it in terms of that trade-off?
Mm-hmm.
So wealth, I love your description of inner gold. I think wealth is a misnomer, actually, in the definition that we put around it. I love inner gold, because that really starts to get you thinking where you should be, which is inside and from the heart, rather than in a more material way, which wealth usually is viewed as.
Yeah, I mean, I had a corporate job working as a geologist, and your life's kind of secure and a good salary, and like probably was a job for life. But I just had this overwhelming feeling that this wasn't what life was about, and I had to leap whilst I was young and had energy and health, and go and see the world and do things. And it was one of the scariest moves of my life, but also it felt like a complete no-brainer. I had to do it. I had to step out to use the body that I've got and could use whilst I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sometimes very scary, isn't it, to make those decisions and to somehow trust that things will work out when you don't know how you're going to survive materially in the world. But I think when we do have the courage to do what feels right to us, surprising things unfold and happen that do manage to support us in the world. And that's definitely what's happened for me. Like, I think once upon a time my dream was to be an athlete and an adventurer, and for that to be the kind of mainstay of my life, and I never believed that was possible. And then somehow, I don't really know how it's come about.
Yeah, that's really weird. And here's a question for you then, because sometimes I do a lot of work in the value space. And yes, I often say, when you know what your values are, decisions are easy and you don't need money and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes I ask myself, are you just speaking from a position of privilege because you're able to make that choice? So describing the choice that you made, what sort of financial support did you have to fall back on? When you were talking about being brave and making a choice, could you just share a little bit about that?
Well, I suppose I didn't have any dependents. That's probably a big thing. When you don't have children, it's much easier to make those decisions because it's only you that you have to support and survive with, and you know that you'll find a way. So that brings a certain degree of liberty with that, I think, which is what the case was for me. And I suppose I had skills that I knew I'd be able to apply somewhere to bring some money in, like freelancing, and I knew it would take some time to build up those contacts and the ability to do that. But I guess I was youngish, like 30, so I didn't really think about it too much. You just tend to leap in and do it. Whereas maybe as you get older, you have more processes going on around what the pros and cons might be, or fears around, maybe you get accustomed more to a certain standard of living, or there's more pressures to live a certain way, or pressures to contribute to events or family things, or I don't know, whatever it might be. There's just a lot more, there's potentially a lot more layers, aren't there, as you go through life, that might start to make those decisions a little bit harder than when you're just kind of living freely and don't have dependents, etc.
Yeah, I think for me the dependence one is the big thing, because I do remember, so I've 4 children, and when they were growing up, I was very conscious that the reason I was doing the work that I was doing was really to provide them with opportunities as they grew up. And perhaps I would have made different choices had they not been there. Actually, so what's funny about ValuesJam is that sometimes in these conversations, and it's just happened to me, things pop into your head that might not have crossed your mind for many, many years. And so I'll just share one with you. I went to Bali for our honeymoon, and have you been to Bali?
No.
Amazing place. Well, it was then. I haven't been back. So it was quite a few years ago. And it was just the most friendly, relaxed place that I had ever experienced. So on the first day in a foreign country, I don't know what you're like, but we tend to go down to the closest shop and buy bottled water. That's one of the first things to do. And so I went into this shop, got the water, went up to the checkout, and the lady at the checkout said, "Hi, have you just arrived?" So I said, yep, and I'm getting my money ready. And she said, well, you can relax now, you're in Bali. And it was a really chilled place. And when I came back, I remember saying to people, if I hadn't been with my new wife on honeymoon, I think I might have got a job on the beach hiring deck chairs out because it was such a brilliant place.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to another question. And it's the opposite of the last one. So when have you experienced wealth?
Yeah, well, again, the inner gold. So for me, it's always most prolific when I have more space around things. When time doesn't feel pressured, then I feel more wealth inside myself. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've made me think again about that sunrise experience, because when I think about that and your comment about time and space, that was absolutely in play. You know, there was no time pressure. Well, apart from the fact that we chose to get up at that ridiculous time. And then you just look around you and there's no pressure from anywhere. It's just a brilliant place to be. Mine's actually a more material example. I used to run five-star hotels and conference centers and the like. And in this particular hotel, there was a golf course and we had members. And they had to be quite affluent, so it was like 10 grand to join and then £4,000 a year. And one evening I was walking through the bar and one of the members was there. He'd had a bit too much to drink. And so I just started chatting with him, and he went on to explain that he had properties in the country, in London, in Monte Carlo. He had a boat, a couple of flash cars, but then went on to explain that he wasn't married, no children, didn't know who his friends were really, because he wasn't sure whether it was him or his money. And he's probably one of the most miserable people I've ever met. And so again, you know, it's this thing about, well, what is wealth actually? And so I'm gonna absolutely take your inner gold as my new definition of wealth, if you don't mind.
It makes me think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, we need a certain amount to just survive and get by in the world. And if we're struggling to make that, then it's a stress point financially.
Yeah.
But then I think about cultures I've traveled through where people have next to nothing.
Yeah.
And the generosity of people in those cultures is always enormous.
Yeah.
And when I've been in those cultures without food, not because I haven't got money, but because we're in the middle of nowhere and there has been nowhere to get food, or there is no food, or there's very little available. I always just ended up receiving incredible generosity from people that have come forward and given us food or given us water. And then I don't know, it's triggering my brain around something where we have to, you know, I think real richness is is having time to do the things that we love, but also maybe finding a way to enjoy the things that we don't love by kind of reframing them a little bit. So that really works for me. So sometimes if I'm not feeling rich, or I'm focused on the downside of having to do certain chores or jobs, I'll kind of think about why they are good for me, or what I'm learning through them. So yeah, that helps me find more richness when otherwise I might be focused on what's difficult about something.
Oh, I'm with you. You won't know this, but one of my core values is enjoyment. And my definition of enjoyment is remembering how privileged I am to be doing whatever I am doing. So if I'm washing up, I just make sure that I do a really good job, and I enjoy seeing the dishes clean when they're done. Same with weeding. It sounds a bit mad maybe, but it's like...
No, it makes total sense.
Okay. Right. Now, I know this is an abridged version, which I'd love to do a more full-on version some other time maybe, but the way the game finishes around is to ask this question. What are you encouraged to do differently about wealth as a result of our conversation?
Well, it's actually quite interesting, because it's something I've been thinking about a bit personally recently. Again, not in the monetary sense, but my life has changed a lot in the last 5 months. I've been a full-time Paralympic athlete for 13 years. This summer had a really challenging summer with my health.
Mhm.
And I've decided to stop that route of training now and move into a different kind of phase of life. And I've been doing a lot more work online and a lot of coaching work. And whilst I love it, I've realized that my health and my time and space is more important to me. I value it more, but I also do value the work that I'm doing and the contact I have with people and the interconnections that it enables. Sometimes in the past, I've had all the time and space, but I felt lonely. So I'm just looking at the balance of how do I balance time and space with connection and purpose, because those things are really important. If we don't, I think for all of us, but certainly I know they are for me. If I don't have them, then again, I feel less rich inside, less wealthy. So yeah, I'm just it's almost like I'm watching a new landscape emerge for myself with new elements and a new way of doing things, which is normal when we change something after so many years of doing something the same way. And it's just interesting to look at how I feel less rich in that inner gold sense at the moment than I have done. But I also think that's what's interesting about it, because I'm navigating new circumstances and I need to find a way to connect with all that again, but by reframing or by making some decisions to change things. So it's just kind of connects quite well to where I'm at in terms of finding my own inner gold and keeping that those things that really matter really at the forefront.
Okay. And in terms of you doing that, is your approach more to be very mindful and aware of it and to see how it emerges, or do you take a more planned approach where you say, I'm going to do these things?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely more the former style, the emergent, organic,
Yeah.
notice it and see what unfolds thing. But in some ways, I think that's the way that works for me best. I like the idea of maybe planning for it or doing a more cognitive look at things, but that's not my natural way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think people who fool themselves that the planning route is the only way, like I say, I think they're fooling themselves, because there is so much more that is unpredictable or that we don't know about than there is that we do know about. So in many ways, the emerging route is the only way, ultimately. Mine is similar but more specific. So I went to my first face-to-face conference a week and a bit ago, and it was good, and I met some interesting people. But when I got home, I was really, really conscious and quite begrudging that I'd spent 2 hours traveling that day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to do that less, actually. I'm going to be much more mindful of giving up 2 hours of travel time and ask myself the question, well, what is that really for?
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for putting some time aside for us today to ValuesJam. That's it. And let's welcome Susie back.
Thank you,
Hi,
Alan. That was a really
guys.
nice conversation. Thank you.
No, I was just going to echo that. A really great, insightful conversation. So thank you again, Karen. Thank you, Alan. My takeaways, certainly listening to the two of you, were this thing about, having the courage to leap. I remember speaking to Bronnie Ware, who's the author of the top 5 regrets of the dying. And she very much said that the universe will always reward courage. So if you are thinking of taking that leap, that risk, it will be rewarded because you just set that intention. So, and that thing about freedom when you're traveling, when you have that space, I mean, that I completely relate to that. And I'm thinking right now in my life, there's not a lot of freedom and space and spare time. So I was just like, okay, that has to be the marker for me, the intention. What am I going to do differently? And creating that space. And when you're moving into that new space of coaching people and supporting people, it can take a lot out of you when you're giving. And I do think when we talk about wealth, for me, health is fundamentally
Yeah.
the most important thing. And I think, you know, we only briefly touched on that because of, you know, we're short of time here, but for me, health, because you can't do anything. And if you know, if you are in a privileged position where you have wealth, you'll spend all your money trying to get yourself back healthy again, you know, and it's sort of crazy, you know, worked ourselves into the ground to create wealth, only to then use it to undo all the physical damage. So yes, I will be focusing on how I can create some space and freedom and lighten the load a bit of self-care. So thank you again, guys. So it's back over to the world changers now. Do reflect on this conversation. Write this question into your journals. You know, what does wealth mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And what are you going to do differently as a result of this conversation, or whatever comes up in your journals? What do you find? So do put details in the comments below, share your reflections, and let's keep spreading the ripple effect, which is what Change Your World is all about. And ValuesJam, all about creating harmony. So thank you again, guys. Love
Bye,
you
Karen.
both.
Bye, Susie.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good to meet you. Thanks both.